All right, so now we're in the fun stuff. This is where it gets really fun and you can really experiment with what you have. So we're going to talk about dye baths and the different materials that you can use for your dye baths. So the dye sources, we're going to use the word dye source, so you'll hear us say that repeatedly.
And dye source is any animal, plant, mineral, and or other material that creates the actual dye. So the color, the pigment that you're going to use to dye the bundles that we made in the last video.
Right, but before we get to that, we're going to talk a little bit about pH and why pH is important when you are doing dye pot dyeing. So pH level is on a scale from 1 to 11. Normal pH is between 5 and 7.
Yep.
So with dye pot dyeing, it is good to have that neutral area of 5 to 7.
That word's very important, neutral. So yes, you want between 5 and 7, 5, 6, or 7 on the acidic scale, the pH scale.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you're on the low end of the scale, so between 1 and 4, you're more acidic. If you're on the high end of the scale, so from 8 to 11, you're more base or alkaline.
Yep.
So what we would recommend, it's not required, but what I would recommend, and this may determine kind of how you prepare your dye baths, is to test the pH level in your tap water. Because if you have tap water that is neutral in pH, use your tap water.
You are golden.
You're good to go. My tap water is not that way, and it does affect the colors that you get from your dye bath.
Which we will explain in much more detail in the next video, or maybe the one after it, in a future video.
Yes.
So, and it sounds so funny to say it that way, but there's a reason, and it's so exciting. So you just basically have to wait. But
right. But if you're living on the edge, go with it. The first few times that I did dye pot dyeing, I just lived on the edge and I pulled what was out of my tap, and then I actually started testing it and went, wow, that's interesting. So I've now started using distilled water, which is what we will be using for our demonstration purposes. And you can just buy distilled water at your local store, and it's relatively
on Amazon.
Or on Amazon. It is relatively inexpensive to use. But let's go ahead and test the pH of my tap water. So I live in Pennsylvania, and this is where we're filming this workshop.
Hello.
So my water will be completely different than yours.
And so even though we're not going into super detail about the pH scale, because we want to surprise you with that later, what's important for this specific video is you're looking for as neutral water on the pH scale as you can get.
Right.
So between 5 and 7 is what we're shooting for.
So I just have a pH test kit. You can get these if you have a pool. If you're lucky enough to have a pool in your backyard, you will already have these on hand because you're testing the pH of your water. So I just have tap water in my glass, and I'm just going to take out one of these strips. Well, I was on the wrong side. So you can see the strip has color markings right here on the end. And I'm going to put it in my water. And it's going to turn a color. And you pull it out. And then on the back of your pH container, there is a chart, and you line up your strip with what color on here matches it the closest. And actually my water is now more neutral because I'm at a 6. When I've tested this before, so maybe they've put some different chemicals in my water, because it's been about 1.5 years since I've tested my pH. My water was actually more acidic.
It was, I remember.
Right, so it is now, I would say if it lines up here, it's probably about 6.25. So
somebody wasn't doing their job last time.
Yeah. So my water is in that neutral range. So we can use tap water for the purposes of this, but I have a lot of distilled water, so we're going to use that for our demonstration, just to kind of keep it very clinically, I don't know what the word is.
As scientific as possible, because there is, and Tina and I keep saying that too, there's a lot of science involved, But even science is very experimental. And again, if you're not paying attention to things like the pH balance or, you know, which type of materials you're using, then your results are going to be varied. What you're dyeing with, all of that stuff. So to keep it as scientific and educational as possible, we are using distilled water, pH neutral. If we had known your tap water was this neutral this time, we probably would have used that. But again, last time we knew it wasn't.
Yep.
And so yeah, test your water, because then you don't have to go out and buy 12 gallons of distilled water.
So, like DeeDee said originally, the dye sources can be all sorts of things. So this is just a very small sampling of what we are going to be dyeing. This is hibiscus flower, and not only does it create a beautiful pinkish hue dye, it's great in tea.
And it smells divine.
Wonderful. Like we're sitting here,
we are having tea later, just so you know.
It's great. This is madder root. So roots in many plants are the dye source for a lot of plants. Some plants, it's the flowers. Some plants, it's the leaves. Some plants, it's the roots. And in some plants, it's all of it.
Yes.
And you may get different colors depending on what part of the plant that you're dyeing. This is just your general run-of-the-mill grocery store black beans. Black bean creates this beautiful slate, purpley, light purpley gray,
it's
beautiful
my favorite
color.
And these, it is worth noting, these are dry. They're not canned black beans.
These are dry beans. In this container, we have blueberries. I actually, because blueberries can be a little expensive, I actually buy them when they're buy one, get one at my local grocery store, and I stick them in the freezer.
Yep.
These have been in my freezer for a few months, but these create a beautiful blue hue as well. And we have avocado pits. So I'm a guacamole lover.
Yes.
I love making guacamole.
It's our favorite family thing to do together.
Yeah, I've actually, and they laugh at me at my daytime job, because if they're making guacamole and I want the pits, I'm like, keep the pits for me. And they bring them to me. They think I'm a little strange, but you know, whatever. So these are just avocado pits. You can also use avocado skins, but we're going to use the avocado pit, and it creates this beautiful pink salmon-y color.
Yeah.
We have red cabbage here. You would just be able, just cut this up into smaller pieces for the dye bath, and it creates a purpley blue hue. Do you want to talk about these two?
Yeah, sure. We have turmeric powder. So this is the same turmeric that you would have in your spice drawer, spice rack. You probably already have some. And so this is, one of the things we want to do is certainly show you the different ways that all of the dye sources come. So you can see we have like flowers and plants. Speaking of, this is our favorite. So we've been doing this together for a while, and every time we do it, we do logwood. And this is a bark. You can see in here, they're chips of bark from a logwood tree. And so like we have flowers and roots, but bark works as well. And just so you can see like all the different ways it comes, fruits and vegetables, seeds, right? The avocado seed, and powders. So there's lots of different ways they come. But again, we want to mention, this is a powder base. When you're working with things like this, and even you can see there's a bit of powder included in the logwood chips, have your mask on, right? Anytime you add powder to a liquid and it kind of puffs up, we don't want you breathing that in. And they are all natural, non-toxic, but just safety's sake, make sure you have a mask on and you're not getting that stuff into your lungs. But like, this is an actual head of cabbage. Like, these are actual blueberries. It's all stuff you can get, you know, at the grocery store or easily obtainable. All natural, non-toxic.
Right. And also a lot of the, not a lot, some of the dye sources that we use can only be found on online places.
Yes.
Like the logwood. It's not something that you would find in nature necessarily. I don't even know what part of the world. I think logwood is maybe a South American tree. I'm not positive. Okay. Don't hold me to that. But generally, if you're going to use logwood for dyeing, you would purchase it from a company. This company here, Maywa, based in Canada, has amazing dye source material. So logwood is, like DeeDee said, one of our hands down favorite. You get a variety of colors, and that's we
don't want to tell you.
Yeah, you'll see that in future videos.
We told you what some of these make, but this is going to blow your mind. Like, if nothing else talks you into doing dye pots, the logwood will.
Right. So these are just some examples. And then also, lastly, I actually pulled this out of my fridge as we were talking.
This is one of our favorites too.
Onion skins are fantastic, and don't tell anyone that I told you to do this, but when you're at your grocery store, go peruse through the onion skin basket and pick out the onion skins that have fallen off the onions there. Yep. Stick them in your bag with one little tiny onion so it looks like you are buying an onion. But then you have onion skins, and that's what this bag is. It just sits in my refrigerator all the time.
Before we move on too far, like we don't want to give too much away, but so some of the things you can tell what color, you know, like turmeric powder is really going to give us this very like yellow, sort of goldeny color, and it's beautiful. It makes really great stuff. The logwood, you have no idea what's going to come from this. It's so exciting. And then, you know, like the blueberries give us, we talked about like a very blue, purpley type thing. Some of them are very specific, and you can kind of tell that, but you would never think, you know, that you're going to get this gorgeous salmon pink color from a freaking avocado pit.
That's green.
And again with this one, I know I keep going back to it, but you guys are going to be so excited when you see what this does. It's brown. It's friggin' wood.
Yeah.
And it makes the most amazing colors.
So, to prepare your dye bath, let me move some of these just off to the side so we got that in camera.
Oh, so for the purposes of this demonstration, we are going to stick with our logwood. So we're going to go through this, and we'll talk about each of them, how they're going to work, and you know, you'll have a sheet you can look at about ratios and variants and things that we're adding to our pots. But so everything you can see on camera and get a demonstration all the way through, we're going to do logwood.
Yep. So all of the other colors that you're going to experiment with, we're not going to actually show the video of it. It's just going to be logwood. But we will share with you some charts of different products that we have dyed, some of the colors that we've gotten out of our dye pots.
Our results. We're going to do at least one bundle in every variant. So keep that in mind. We'll have lots to show you. And I want to say real quick, so if you... Tina and I have been doing Mad Matter together for a year and a half, and it's a 3-day workshop. Sometimes when we go international, a little bit longer. There's a lot of other stuff involved there, but we're doing such a large variety here. Some of the things we haven't dyed with before. Yep. So it's really exciting for us, and we have, what do we say, like 21 different ingredients?
Yeah, we're playing along with you as well.
Yeah.
Yes, we pulled out a bunch of different things that we've never dyed.
We have a good core. We have a core of colors that we stick with for our in-person workshop, and it has a rainbow. It's a rainbow of dyes, dye pots, and dye baths. But we got really excited, and we have a lot of stuff. So your chart, your resource, this resource for you is very large, and we hope that you get as much fun out of it as we are.
Yep. All right. So first thing is get a pot. So this is just a plain old kettle pot. And again, I don't use this for cooking. This is specific for my dye pot dyeing, and I just keep all my material in a Rubbermaid tub, and it sits in the garage. So just take your pot, and for the purposes of our demonstration, we're going to use about a half a gallon of water per dye pot. So that's probably a good starting point for you. That'll allow you to put, I would say, 4 or 5 bundles in here. You have to be mindful. You don't want to fill it so full of bundles in your dye pot that there's no room for the liquid to move, because you do want it to kind of move around in your bundles so it gets to all of the different fibers and everything in your bundle. So we put about a half gallon of water in here, and distilled water. We're using distilled water. And again, if you test your pH and it's pH neutral, fill it with tap water.
Yep. Also, you don't have to leave your dye pot in this pot. So it sounds kind of funny to say it that way, but after you've done the simmering process, which is what we're going to show you here, you can transfer this to a smaller, taller bowl where then you have sort of more volume in your dye pot, in your dye bath.
Yeah, so I always use just regular old mixing bowls to transfer my dye bath into it, and I have different sizes depending on how large my dye bath is. And again, I use these specifically for the dye bath dyeing, not for mixing cookies or whatever I'm making. So
yeah.
All right, so you've got your water in your pot. What we would recommend for starting, so again, every dye source will be different, but a good starting point is if you have dye sources that are bulky, it's actually the source, the root, the berry,
Yes.
the flower,
The cabbage.
the bean, the cabbage. Use about a cup of material to a half a gallon of water.
Yep.
This is what I have left over actually for my logwood, and it's not quite a cup, so I'm gonna pour that in there and I'm gonna go with it, but
yeah, but you can see, so we have half a gallon of water and we put about a cup of our source, our dye source, into the pot.
So you can see in here why, you've got the little bark pieces floating around in here. So if you're using a powder dye source,
Right.
we would recommend for a half a gallon or a gallon of water to use 2 tablespoons of powdered source material into your water.
And there are lots of other things that come powdered. So it's not like this came, the turmeric, it's really popular right now. It came out of our spice cabinet, but they have turmeric for dyeing. It's just like this. And there are other dye sources that come powdered.
Actually, I think logwood comes
is
in
one of them
too.
that comes powdered.
Yep.
And madder root, like we have
Yep.
root there, but you can also, it's also ground, comes powdered. Yeah.
So they do the work for you. They ground it down into a powder. So I'm going to transfer this over to the stove. So I transfer the pot to the stove. I'm going to put it on medium-high temperature. But one of the most important things that we have to stress when you have your dye pot on your stove,
Yes.
you want to bring the temperature just to a simmer. If you get it to boiling and over, it's not that your color will completely disappear, but you will tend to get more of a muted, you won't get the
Yes.
intense color that you're looking for. So it's very important to, when you bring your water up to the boil, it's just to that boiling point and then you bring it back down to a simmer. So
it's not 100% the same, but it's almost like burning the pigment. If you bring it to a boil and then continue it in that boil, it overcooks the color, the pigment. And so we just want to bring it up to that temperature to release the pigment from our dye source. And then we're gonna turn it back down to a simmer and let it simmer. We're gonna, we keep ours around an hour. And so by saying that, that doesn't mean that you can't go a little bit longer or a little bit shorter. Just keep your eye on it. That's what's most important about this. Like, don't walk away and let it sit there for a couple hours and do its own thing. Like, you don't want it to get back up to a boil. And you just want to keep an eye on it. You can see as you stir it and as things are happening, like the color start to seep into the water and your dye bath to start forming.
right. And then also too, as you saw when I put the logwood into the water, it was sitting on top. So just give it a quick stir.
Yep.
Again, these are my Dyepot dye spoons.
Look at
so
how
you
cool
can
this
see
is.
how it's dyed on the end because I use it only for dyeing. So I'm going to give it a quick stir just to kind of get it mixed into the water a little bit. And you just let it simmer for the next hour.
Yes. 60 minutes, that's our, and again, so like, and we mentioned this before too, so this is like mixed media dye pots, right? This is what we've been doing. It's worked well for us. We found a way, to make it non-toxic and easily accessible. That's another thing we like about it. It's easily accessible and it's mostly permanent. So, when we talk about the bundle sitting in the mordant and all of that, that's not to say, right, that this will be great for clothing. That's one thing we kind of want to mention and have probably mentioned before. It's mixed media art.
Right.
So that everything with that goes a little experimentation and extra fun.
Right. So we'll be back in an hour after our dye pot has been simmering for an hour, and we'll show you the next step in the dyeing process.
Sounds good.